The beating of Tyre Nichols didn't seem to raise an eyebrow or really concern anybody there. And you can see that when you have 10 individuals that are terminated. Where's the good guy or the good girl on scene? Where is the person say, okay, it's all over now, this guy needs some help? There was no one there. What frustrates me most, and I want to be clear, it's not just me, every single first responder that I've spoken with, it is such a blatant violation of EMS and medical ethics to not render care for somebody. They could have made the difference. Now, we'll have to wait to see what the autopsy states, but I will tell you that if the autopsy suggests, even remotely, that these were injuries that could have been survivable, then these medics, I believe, are culpable. First of all, they have to assure that the scene is safe. That's the very first thing that EMS and all first responders are supposed to do. Clearly, the scene was safe. There was a plethora of law enforcement officers there, and the particular patient was handcuffed, didn't seem to be a visible threat based on the video. The next thing you're supposed to do is to immediately assess the patient. That begins with something very simple called the ABCs. Assess the airway, their breathing, and their circulatory status. At a very basic level, that begins with just talking to the person and seeing if they're lucid, if they're able to make contact with you. At a more advanced level, if someone is semi-conscious, what it appeared that he was, the victim was, from the video, laying them down and making sure that their airway is secure and that they have no issues breathing, and applying oxygen. Thereafter, if someone has significant head trauma or neck trauma, you're supposed to immobilize them. At bare minimum, not only this national protocols, but also Tennessee state protocols and the medical community states that if someone presents with significant head trauma, which Tyre Nichols clearly had, that the bare minimum they're supposed to get is oxygen. And the reason for oxygen is because it staves off brain damage, because as the head suffers injury, there's swelling that happens in the intracranial space within the brain cavity. That swelling can clamp down on the blood vessels that supply vital oxygen to the brain. And what supplemental oxygen does, by applying a mask on that victim, you enrich the oxygen that's available in the brain. The last part of that is understanding what role their lack of medical care and rapid transport contributed to the ultimate demise of Tyre Nichols. If that can be established, and that's generally established through the autopsy, what we call forensic examination, then they're clearly culpable. There is no out for any EMS people. There's a reason why they teach you medical ethics and medical tort in the very first module of every class. If you're not ready to do the right thing, as we say in the field, then this job is not for you. And there are people who bow out after the first, they understand that there's legal consequences, not just civilly, but criminally, for failure to act. After the George Floyd murder, you saw many police officers across the country start changing their training and their protocols, policies, and procedures to hold law enforcement who stand idly by while these acts are committed equally culpable. That's what we need our EMS to do. You put on the blinders, it doesn't matter your circumstance. We need them to treat the signs and symptoms as they're trained to do, and then transport the people to the hospital. It really is that simple. I think the EMS has a cognitive bias when it comes to law enforcement involved cases. EMS relies heavily on law enforcement for their protection. And EMS is, I think, the third or fourth most dangerous profession based on federal statistics in this country. They rely so heavily on law enforcement for their safety and to get home at the end of the day. We've seen time and time again EMS specifically targeted by people, lured into traps, assaulted, and killed. And so when they're on the scene with law enforcement, they rely on law enforcement for their safety. And that's where that blue wall starts to extend to them. They do not want to run afoul of their law enforcement colleagues. It is a very intertwined community with law enforcement, EMS, and fire. And so that kind of police mentality, we call it, would kind of seep in sometimes. And so what we need to do is empower EMS to be the patient advocates that they're taught to be, right? I've seen time and time again, EMS professionals walk into the emergency room, wait for 10 or 15 minutes, not have their patient seen properly or treated properly, and then go to the charge nurse or go to the head physician and say, hey, I have a patient here, you need to see them. That's being a patient advocate. We expect that from them. They should do the same thing in the field.